Good morning, everyone. My name is Amanda Phillips-De, and I'm the director of the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance. Our first panel of today, or for today, is Fostering Data Literacy, Helping People Be Curious and Confident. I was pulled in to moderate this, not last minute, but slightly last minute. So I think briefly in terms of opening remarks, I think a lot of us we all work in data literacy in some mode or another, whether that be sort of outreach that we do to communities to sort of teach them how to work with or engage and learn from data. But we also do data literacy work internally, right, amongst our staff or even amongst some of our peers or some of the organizations who we work with. We also do this work as a network, right? The impact stories that Jake led and the camp that went on yesterday is very much about not only sort of increasing data literacy as a group, but sort of how do we share and tell those stories widely. So because this is a 9:15 in the morning panel, you guys get to do some work to keep those brains going and active. So what you will notice is there's a lot of materials on your table today, both in terms of Post-it notes and some questions. So for the first kind of 10 minutes of this presentation, we want you to take a couple minutes to write down on the index cards on the table and write what data literacy means to you. So first, I would say do that first. And then in a few minutes, I'm going to tell you to talk to the person next to you. So start writing furiously. I guess I can look down. Oh, I can look down there.
Does anyone see a word that they particularly love or don't like?
Understand. There's lots of understanding.
That's a lot, yeah. Oh, gosh.
Anybody want to comment while we're waiting for all the words to come through? Thank you. Plus, you get NNIP bonus points if you answer me.
Do NNIP bonus points stack?
I think it's good to see the word limitations up there towards the center by understanding, because we have a responsibility, and this is a discussion that came up at our table about like a big part of data literacy is what you can, what you cannot do with data, you have a responsibility to communicate in an effective and reasonable and responsible way when working with data, because you want to be sure you're telling the right stories and not just a story that comes up as a result, and you want to make sure it's the right story.
Yeah, like what's the fit for purpose, kind of. Anyone else before we?
All right, so so keep holding on to your sticky notes. They could be useful later, either by going on the board or we have an activity after the Q&A. So all of that generative juice, keep it going. It's going to be needed later. All right, so we're going to move into our panel discussion portion of today's session. I'm not going to read full bios, but we have Stephanie over here. We have Liz, and we have Amy. So the first question I'm going to extend to you is, what does data literacy mean to you, and describe a way that you have helped to foster that in your community?
I'm Stephanie Cannell, Data Driven Detroit. Data literacy for me is giving people the tools to really understand data. So it can be as simple as being able to read a newspaper article and call like BS on a stat that you're seeing in a poll or something like that. And just being able to be confident that when you click share on Facebook, you're not spreading misinformation. You're actually feeling comfortable in adding to like a conversation. And one way that we've helped build that skill set was, especially during COVID, we recognized within the community, especially here in Detroit, we were one of the harder hit early on, and the data was really incomplete and hard to parse. And so we built out kind of a data consumption guide and went into the community via webinars because COVID, and kind of broke down some of the stats people were talking about. So racial disparities in COVID were really big in Detroit, but that data was missing tons. Like there was so much data missing. And how is that data captured? And how can we actually use it to make decisions? And walking people kind of through some of the steps of critical thinking around those data points so that when they went to community meetings virtually or did outreach within their community about safety and things like that, they were able to understand how the definitions of a positive COVID test changed over time. Early on, there were no COVID cases, but there were no COVID tests. So like when you start thinking about how data is collected, how does that impact what you are, the story you're able to tell over time?
Hi everyone, Liz Monk from Pittsburgh. When people ask me what data literacy is, I tend to freeze and not want to answer the question because it stresses me out a little, but we tend to use a definition that comes from Catherine D'Ignazio and Raul Bargava, which is the ability to read, work with, analyze, and communicate with data as part of a larger questioning process. And in our approach, we purposely don't focus on like teaching a tool or mastering that technical side of things, but try to spark conversation, teach concepts, build the confidence to ask questions, and create a positive experience. I noted nobody put fun as their word, but that is one of the things we try to do, and we have like a lot of different efforts with different audiences, from working with our partners at the city and the county to do a data literacy for data stewards. We have an art and data fun project. We have youth data literacy and community data ambassadors, so people working already who just want to feel more comfortable and confident using data in their work.
Good morning, everyone. Amy Carroll-Scott. I'm at the Urban Health Collaborative, which is at an academic institution, Drexel University in Philly. And I say that because I ditto everything that Stephanie and Liz said, but I think for me, data literacy is about breaking down power dynamics between those who typically hold the power and the technical capacity and the terminology around data and research, which are research institutions and other large institutions, from communities who feel disenfranchised, but from research, those institutions and the decisions being made by the data and research that are generated about them and not with them. So we take a couple of different approaches. On the individual level, it's about all that Liz and Stephanie just said, but also empowering folks with an understanding of what institutional review boards do not do for them, which is think about harms to communities and not just to individual participants of studies. And so as we build their data literacy and capacity, we're also building their ability to challenge those systems and hopefully try to change them. And we support a community research review board in West Philadelphia, an area that's overstudied, a community of color that's been disinvested in. And so that takes me to the community-based organization level. We think about building data infrastructure and research infrastructure at the community level. So thinking about what community-based organizations need, whether or not they have a data staff person or not, or whether or not data looks like what funders require them to evaluate about their programs, or what funders require they do as a community health assessment, given that we're in public health, or some other community needs assessment in order to get the funds. So not only supplying the data for them and having them be critical, sort of catalysts of what data is available that we can make available, but also questioning how the data was collected and whether or not it represents their community and whether or not they would be better off collecting these data themselves to tell the stories of their community. So we think about data capacity at the organizational community level and at the individual level.
Thank you. So this is a two-part question, and I'm not sure if it's, I think anyone could likely take it, but what are the key components of an effective data literacy training approach or program? And can you describe your experience in tailoring these for different audiences?
I like your list.
You like my list?
Yeah.
Okay, I will start. So one that I noted is time. I think you have to be invested in this work and be able to put in the time to actually build relationships with the people you're working with so that you can build the trust. I think it needs to be tied to the interests and the work of the audience and valuing each other's perspectives. I think it's really important to create a space where people feel comfortable asking questions and being vulnerable, and I think that ties back to the time piece of it. That's my start. Toss.
I think for us, it's been finding, especially when we're doing in-person workshops, making sure that there's some engaging components. People are walking away from the workshop with something tangible for them to actually use in their work. So we have something, we made a 6-part workshop series called Data University, and some of the different components of that really brought people. We had them track their time at work for a week, and then we used that data set for them throughout the rest of the program so that they could see kind of how much time they were spending on X, Y, Z. And we actually had somebody come in like to the 3rd workshop and said, my accountant asked me how much time I spend fundraising, and I could look at that last week and answer it. And like she was so excited that she actually had the data to answer the question. But if we had just like made up a silly workshop kind of activity, it wouldn't have been as meaningful for the community. Right now I'm working on a data management workshop, and what people are going to walk away from is like a roadmap of their 3 key audiences, 2 of the most important data points for those key audiences, and what they're going to do with that data, so that when they go back and start thinking about how should they like put together their folder system and like what's more important, the topic or the year or the subject matter, they're able to like keep referring back to this kind of roadmap of like, I need to be able to access this data point immediately when this person asks me for this reason. And then they can prioritize kind of like how they're structuring their internal systems to make sure that they're able to actually answer that question, because we find most people are collecting too much data and don't know what to do with it, and then they bring it to us and we don't know what to do with it because there's just so much. But really getting people to kind of hone in and having that like tangible takeaway that's related to their job or their work has been really helpful.
I think, just to build on what you guys said, I think demystifying terminology is really important. Folks, in particularly in the sort of nonprofit community-based organizations space, sort of acquire a lot of different terms for the same things, especially from funders who use evaluation and indicator and metric terms incorrectly. And so, you know, what you learn is you dig in and you create like a parking lot of terms or acronyms nobody understands, and showing folks it's okay to, you know, it's a safe space to show that that you don't understand these things. You realize a few things. One is that folks are too afraid to ask those questions, and so if you're in a collaborative space and folks aren't saying much or seem to, you know, research colleagues of mine have taken that for, agreement. And it turns out when you dig in deeper that it's just a lack of comfort or confidence to say, I don't know what that means. I don't know what a confidence interval means. I don't know what you mean when you say the word indicator. So I think demystifying those terms is important. And then the second thing that emerges, and Stephanie and I were talking about this yesterday, is that there's a lot of trauma about math. And as soon as you name it as the elephant in the room, especially if you're teaching data analytic techniques or anything that requires, any kind of math.
Data.
Yeah, even just the word data. As soon as you open up the space for folks to bring that up, it's unbelievable how there's just this sigh of relief in the room. And then folks are like, okay, now we can learn together. And so I think some of the most creative ways of teaching things like, we were talking yesterday, like mean and median, or, have come from community members. And that would be the other thing that I would mention, is that I think you all 2 years ago met some of the community researchers we have, who we employ at Drexel, and we build their research and data capacity constantly. But they're the best trainers of community members and community-based organizations, because they understand exactly what it is that folks are confused about, where those fears and lack of confidence and traumas are, and they're the ones who can most comfortably bring folks out into the space.
Yeah, I'll add to that. When we were doing Data University, I don't remember what Noah called it back then, but it was a feedback loop, and making sure that we were we weren't just taking people's feedback, we were actually implementing it in the next workshop so they could see that their feedback was being taken seriously. So it was like people might say, I didn't understand XYZ, and we would make sure that the next class, that's the first thing we covered. Or I want more examples about housing data. And so we would actually actively call out how we were tailoring the workshops to the audience, so that they could see, we are listening to you, we're building something that we really genuinely want you to walk away with something from this. We're not just talking to you to talk to you. We want you to genuinely take something away, so we will adapt ourselves to fulfill what you need, and making sure you're collecting that data and having that continuous conversation with the people who are coming to your workshops, and being willing to say, well, that activity did not work. Let's unpack why, or what can we change, and being really flexible as you're going into different communities and into different organizations to kind of give them what they need, not necessarily what you think they need.
I'll add too that we really try to emphasize that people are coming with their own personal experience, and that they are coming with their expertise too. There's a lot of expertise that goes into data, and being technically proficient is a piece and can be, but there's a whole other world, so we try to emphasize that as well.
I think the comments, as someone who came from a nonprofit environment before this one, about trauma around math really resonates with me. I worked in multiple organizations where there was a real fear of our data management systems. Then basically being told, you touch this, I can't touch it anymore. And so I really appreciate that observation. And I guess a question that emerges out of that is, we've talked a lot about how you all have structured your programs. How are you thinking about the user themselves? What sort of skills do you try to train up in the groups that you're working with to be responsible data users, to be confident data users, to really expand their sort of horizons on thinking through and working with data critically?
I sat in the seat especially so that I could go last. I think I really lately have been thinking a lot about the organizational level, and we've been thinking in terms of, and I need to write this up and share it with you all at some point, but we've been using a pyramid of community data users, where at the top are the very large nonprofits that tend to have more research and data capacity. In the middle are the smaller community-based organizations who tend to have a lot less of it. They're the ones who are providing the programs and the services, and research is an inconvenience, but a necessary one, and one that they still don't necessarily get why they have to do when what they want to do is serve their communities. And then at the bottom, of course, are residents, the folks who work in those organizations and those who have all in the communities that we work with, just the deep, deep mistrust of research institutions and governmental institutions and all the data that's been and continues to be collected about them that further stigmatizes them and still doesn't meet their needs. And so we think about what each of those groups need, and the data literacy at the individual level, is about that person's ability to challenge systems and data points and use data points for their own, their own purposes. But for the middle level, it's about building their capacity for the first time, really thinking about ways that data and research cannot be dirty words in their organizations, things they have to collect for funders, hoops they have to jump through, and how they can take the power back, that information, that data can be useful to them and improve the great work that they do. And at the tip of the pyramid are those whose data infrastructure really it has the ability to continue to improve and to think about ways that they can be leaders amongst the smaller grassroots organizations for which they often serve as a convener or can be a capacity builder. And in general, thinking about how we can invest in these systems of community data literacy and infrastructure, because otherwise, how will they have the capacity to solve their own problems if we're not doing so? That was a long answer, I apologize. See, I told you I shouldn't have gone first.
So I think about kind of our data literacy structuring and a couple different things. There's how do you use our tools to answer your data question? So we have a number of tools. We give workshops specifically to people who kind of know they have a data question, don't necessarily know the source of the data, and once we get them the data, they can kind of go. And so those workshops are very technical. They're focused on, if you click on this button, this will get you this data. You can kind of find the right geography in this way. We might go through some of the terminology, like what is a geography, what is a census tract, those kinds of things. But they're very much about like accessing data because people are more comfortable with it. We also have kind of like the community level, what do you do when you see a data point you don't understand it? And those kinds of workshops, we actually have some different checklists that we've created for people. Like think about I should have looked at it before I gave the panel, but it's like scope, like how many people did they talk to? What's the geography that they're trying to represent in the community? So really like getting them to think about like the specific pieces that make a data point is one number, but it represents all these other things. And so just helping people think through critically how to be skeptical kind of the data that they're accessing. And then there's like in between those two an actual data skills kind of thing. So working through what is a median, what is a mean, and kind of, like Amy said, demystifying those concepts and terms and like helping people not just like not cringe when they hear them, but also be able to apply them when they see them in real life. I've found that when we start, especially just talking about like how much data people access in their everyday life, like everybody is making decisions every day using data. They just don't think that they're using data. And so we sit around and we brainstorm data points. Like, you went to Starbucks today, cool. Think about all the data points you created. There was electricity, and like Starbucks has to now pay a bill. And so now there's a credit card bill for that electricity usage. And there's databases every day in your life collecting so much information about you. And you use that information. You look at your bank account and you say, oh wow, I have to like triage these bills. And once you start like unpacking like what does data mean, it becomes less scary because like you can if I'm doing it every day already, then it's okay. And then we just move to the next step of like, what can you do in your organization with what you have? And people generally, if we like take them along that path, they usually hopefully get a little bit less freaked out or traumatized. I am a math traumatic person. I cried every day in Algebra 1 in high school. So my mom's with the baby right now. She'll attest to that. And here I am. And I tell that story because, like, if you told anyone I would work in data when I was a kid, they would have laughed in your face. And if I can be up here talking now, like, anybody can figure it out.
Can I piggyback on that real quick? I think a lot about how organizations, community-based organizations, also collect data and do research all the time and don't think it that call it that as well. And so we've created some tools for how to engage, more equitably with research partners, but it starts with a list of, do you collect intake data? Do you collect evaluations after, education sessions? Do you, to evaluate your programs? Because folks don't see themselves in those agencies as doing research, and yet they are literally doing research every day. And so part of the demystifying at the organizational level is also this, like, you do this, you got this. You just need to have some of the training that researchers do so that you can better couch it as such and be more confident in what it tells you.
Amy, I think this question, I'm going to throw it immediately back to you, but perhaps there are others too. But the question is around sort of how do you build programs that incorporate sort of ethical considerations in data use? And I think that just the example that you gave is, and this is a common feature for Beanie as well, we work with people who are doing research but not thinking of themselves as researchers, right? So they're not thinking in sort of ethical modes of data collection, nor would they sort of have that training if they're not working with PPID or sort of sensitive data. So I'm wondering if perhaps you can sort of describe some tactics that you've used to sort of incorporate the ethics into sort of the pyramid that you're talking about, because it seems like it would be different at every level of the pyramid.
Okay, let me think about how to answer that. I do think a lot about ethics in data and research. I think because from the perspective of a research institution, we have an institutional review board. And we're required to consider, all of these ethical considerations. And so I've basically created curricula for community-based organizations that kind of mimic the human subject certification training that we have to do when you're a part of an IRB. And it starts with, what the heck is an IRB? Because people hear this term in the community, they have no idea what it means. So there are two parts of it at the organizational level. It's explaining to them what IRBs do and who is beholden to them. That might be research partners or funders of theirs. That our health department has one. What does that mean for you when you're funded by the health department? Things like that. The other is how to ensure that you're bringing an ethical lens to the work that you do, given that your work is likely not governed by an IRB. And so they find that really important. And of course, they're thinking about the needs and benefits to their communities, but maybe didn't have some of the language around beneficence and risk and, and things like that. But I think lately my work has moved toward, let's make those IRBs more accountable to what they're doing in communities. And I've talked to a few folks about this. I had to jump upstairs and record a podcast yesterday because we released a report where we had done a study of IRBs in Philadelphia to understand how community engaged or not their capacity or practices or policies are, and whether or not they're looking at things like geographic burden of their research in certain communities of color that are totally overburdened by research. And they're like, please, a $10 million grant to study structural racism? Can you please just come here and help us fix the effects of structural racism? Why are you collecting these data again. Didn't you do this before? They think there's like a place in the cloud where researchers all discuss which researchers we're going to send to their communities, and it turns out we don't have to discuss with each other. And so I think a community research review board is a big part of that. And so part of it was creating a curricula for those board members to understand what the what IRBs do well and what they don't do well. And then actually I gained access to the city training program, the Human Subject Certification program through Drexel for these folks. And literally, like in many, many iterations, got them through all the certifications, not just to be not just to be study personnel, which many of them do also with us as community researchers, but actually to take the IRB review training. And then they've since created a community research review board, which researchers looking to conduct research in their community come to them. And they now have the capacity to ask the questions like, do you have a community engagement plan? And the answer, by the way, is always no. And then, and how is the data coming back to the community? How is it going to benefit the community? And now they're getting to the point where they're asking like really, really amazing methodological questions. So anyway, I'm sorry that was a long-winded way, but it's definitely a place where my head's at.
I will jump in with our data literacy for data stewards programming. So we have created this series that is for people who are at every piece of the data life cycle. So really with the city and the county publishing and putting out data along with people who are using it. With the goal was to ask questions about data, reflect on how the actions are impacting community, and are they reinforcing systems of oppression, and then co-creating strategies together. So tackling things like missing data, context, classification systems, and it has been a powerful series. I think people have gotten a lot out of it.
Okay. And Liz, this is a question for you.
Specifically for me.
What advice can you give to help go beyond one-time data literacy trainings to ongoing engagement of participants?
Yeah, I don't know that I have the answer to this, but it is something we think about and do our best to. Well, what came up is with our Community Data Ambassadors series, we had created a really nice community, and we were meeting, we were having dinner, we created a really nice group, and then it ended, and that felt irresponsible. So how do you keep that going when funding runs out? So what we have done is try to create programming where people can go from one to the next. So a lot of people from that series then came into the Data Literacy for Data Steward series, but it is something I would say we struggle with when we try to do it intentionally, where we are building relationships with people, but then the programming. And so how do we keep it going? How do we continuously fund the work after the initial part of it is done?
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
I think we should go after a funding source that we can all use and replicate some of these great best practices in our various cities. It's really hard to get funding for this. It started out when I was in California. There was a great funder that funded like 19 rounds of data and democracy throughout the state. And it was the only opportunity I've ever had to build community data capacity, and that was the sole purpose of the grant. Usually we're eking this out of other funds, right? We know that it's necessary, it's part of partnership, it's part of making sure that our data has an impact, but it's very hard to do that. And I think if we raise our voices together and attract some funding that's about building, investing in community data infrastructure as a sustainable and important piece of solving the inequities that we're all so concerned about. I think there's lots of lessons learned up here and in the room that we could be replicating.
So, I lost track. Okay. We've talked a lot about groups who have been served by data literacy programs. Where are some of the gaps that are there, both in terms of communities who are either not participating or hard to reach in these types of programs, or groups, organizations, institutions who are just resistant to these types of initiatives?
Quickly, I would say our Art in Data series is very much aimed at people who would never want to come to a data literacy workshop, and it has been fun, and I think we've brought some people in. I would also be really interested in data literacy for like higher ups, funders, boards. I think those are would be an interesting group.
I know in Detroit, one of our big problems or challenges, nobody on our staff speaks another language right now. And so it's really challenging when we're going out into the community of predominantly Arabic speakers, or Bengali, or Yemeni, or Spanish, and you have first-generation immigrants who are part of their community, they're active members, but we struggle to work with them unless we have a community partner there, because we can't talk. We literally can't communicate with them. It was really interesting in the camp session yesterday. Victor was talking about how great the AI translation services have been. And so I was like, maybe this could be the next step of something that's kind of scary to talk about, but could be actually a way to incorporate more voice into some of our work.
I will say that translation is challenging as part of us being the National Coordinating Center for the Compass Initiative, which is an NIH-funded, community-led structural intervention grant-making initiative. That's a long sentence. We're realizing that our interpreters don't understand the data terminology either. And so, as we have bilingual folks in those rooms, we realize that interpretation and translation is a challenge as well. We had that challenge when we translated culturally and linguistically data and democracy into datos de democracia, and so we have a lot of work to do in that space. But I'll say, I think, what I'm noticing is that there's lack of tools for folks to bring back to their communities and organizations. So we've been really focusing on that. Like, here, I will build this literacy or data skill or research skill that you're looking for, but I will give you the tools to bring it back to your organization, because nobody makes data decisions by themselves. It's always in the context of their jobs, their organizations, their advocacy partners, their coalitions, or whatever the case might be. And so, it's wonderful to teach folks how to frame a research question, but we now have lots of worksheets for how to take this back to your organization to collectively brainstorm and prioritize within the context of your organization or coalition which research question or questions you're going to answer together, just as an example. So I think more tools like that, and I think this is a room that knows how to do that kind of work, is really important. That's a big gap.
I would say observationally from the Baltimore side of things, another thing I've noticed is that sort of digital or data training for the elder population tends to focus very much on skill building. So can you open your Word document? Can you access telehealth? And a concern I have in sort of those sort of skill or procedural building is that we're missing context. We know that our elder population are targeted by scams far more readily than most populations, and that there's a kind of critical and lens that also needs to be brought to some of the just regular skills building. But that's just observational from my vantage. We are close-ish to, we are close on time for 5 minutes, so I want to sort of skip ahead to assessment and evaluation. So how are you and your organization thinking about assessing the impact of some of these programs? How are you evaluating them? And more sort of succinctly, how do you know things are working?
Great question. I mentioned the feedback that we incorporate into the workshops. That's something we continue to do even outside of the 6 workshop series. We have lots of one-off workshops that we do as well, and we do take feedback, incorporate it in, build a better program for next time. The impact story side, it's hard because funding, and if we don't have the funding to go back to people and like keep asking questions and like ask them to answer. We've had a couple great stories come out of Data University, so we had good funding for that, and so we were able to storytell around it, but that was 2019, pre-COVID, and we haven't, Detroit just started doing stuff really in person in the last year again. And so we're just really starting to get back into the swing of things, and it's hard to storytell about virtual workspaces. So they're kind of boring. And we've done our best to accommodate the changes, but we're finally starting to get back in real life events. And so we'll see how that goes.
I agree that it's hard. You know, we do pre-post surveys. We talk to people, see if it shows up in the work. We had a participant who was with the city and had a ton of data about litter in the city and called people together to ask like if we could workshop it with him on if mapping this out was going to stigmatize communities. So in stories like that, but it is difficult, I would say, to tell this story.
Yeah, this is exactly why I joined and what we were talking about in the impact storytelling camp session yesterday. I think at the individual level, we really struggle. Folks don't, opt to take our surveys on our data dashboards. But I think we have a story to tell of the various graduates of our Community Power Academy or of our workshops or who have become part of our study personnel and continue to work on project to project or take on a new role as a project manager within Drexel, things like that. That's easier for us to track. At the organizational level, I did develop, because I could not find any measures of community-based organization research capacity, I developed one with colleagues at Yale, and it's easier to track at the organizational level if folks are willing to take such a survey about their day-to-day research activities they already engage in, but also maybe some of these areas that they would like to build their capacity in. The tool can be a nice pre-tool for informing data and research capacity building at the organizational and also for tracking afterwards. So I'm happy to say we're actually using it in Compass to be able to determine whether and how we've been able to enhance these kinds of capacities in the community-based organizations funded by that.
So I think we're at Q&A time. So I want to open the floor to anyone who might have questions. Or comments.
Thank you. David Isiama, Blackwell Data Center. So our methodology section is the least visited part of our website. And one of the things that I have been sort of trying to explore is this idea of gamification as a way to make data less intimidating, but also to sort of like teach people in a sort of surreptitious way. Have any of you explored the idea of gamification in your data literacy work?
We have not done it online, but we do outreach at community events where we actually play games that demonstrate what the data mean. If we're reporting data back about a community survey or something like that, we'll use balls and jars to show percentage and and things to sort of engage both kids and their parents, but not online. It's a fabulous idea.
No, but I want to help you do that because that's super cool sounding. The closest I've gotten is writing about something that people are interested in and incorporating like a sneaky lesson on margin of error. So I do write a lot of like data literacy flavor blogs that are more, hey, look at this data set. Like, whoa, that's so crazy. But like, what does it mean? Like, why did we do it that way? Oh, here's why. And like, kind of like breadcrumb people to a little bit more knowledge based on a cool data set. Like, We had one about food trucks in the city. And like, cool, everybody wants to know about food. And then kind of explain what data collection looked like or something like that. But gamification of methodology sections, that is an NNIP.
Yes.
That is,
We have done, like Amy was saying, a lot of engagement around like fun games. And then just a little dabbling, like we had an open data Mad Libs that we did. But yeah, just kind of but like as an aside, fun little projects, nothing focused.
This was when I was doing my postdoc, but I was doing research in Baltimore City and cities across the U.S. on perceptions of greening, and I was really upset that I thought all of my research was just going to go into papers that no one read. So I built a choose your own adventure governance game where we sort of took scenarios that were sourced from our qualitative work and kind of combined and mixed up, and you could explore and kind of click through to get to like different governance decisions about placement or about planning. And it was clunky, but fun. I don't own that anymore, so I don't know how it's being used, but it does exist.
Good morning, Huilan Kran from the Kellogg Foundation. You talk a lot about community engagement plans in data sovereignty, data literacy. I wonder whether you can talk a little bit about data sovereignty. It's not just about indigenous communities, but also about any communities. If the data is my community's data, then that's sovereignty. So can you talk a little bit about that?
I feel like I talked all last night with folks about community data sovereignty. I'm looking for good models if anybody wants to share. I think being in an academic institution is challenging that our IRB owns any data that they approve, and I'm transparent about that in my MOUs or contracts with community-based organizations when I typically am their research partner. We've do not have the will for a community information exchange in Philadelphia. We didn't have the will for an integrated data system to evaluate Promise Neighborhood. Our health information exchange is not great data, and so the healthcare delivery systems are not really putting their data into it. The community wants the data that was collected from them. So what we've created was and Erica Gilliam can talk more about this from my team, but we created all kinds of ways that folks can request data from us. And we ask them at what level they need the data and explain to them at what level we can provide the data, or that we could write them into our IRB or help them with their infrastructure for data security. It turns out that nobody ends up wanting the raw data. They end up wanting us to help them with analyses, and so we end up co-creating a lot of data briefs together. But we are open that we're willing to help with the capacity needed to enter into a formal agreement to request the data that we collected of their community that technically is owned by Drexel University. But creating a space where the data, and not just aggregate data, can be more made available to those who would use it for the community change, especially primary collected data and not indicators, is a particular need. I think this is where we are in the field. And through Compass, we're convening, which Kathy is sitting on because I nominated her, a data stewardship advisory committee to advise the NIH on exactly these topics. And I think it's an important place for us all. And if anybody who wants to join, let me know, because I think the folks in the room have the expertise to move that conversation forward in that context.
One thing I will just add before we get to the next question is data sovereignty often requires us to move beyond our own feelings about open data, right? I'm aware of a few projects where communities are gathering their own data and they're going to be charging researchers access for it. And it's theirs, and they have sharing agreements around it, and they are tired of folks coming in, using their data, and without compensation, which upsets some scientists in my life, but I'm pretty comfortable with it. So I think, we have some pretty strong-held ideas about data being open, being accessible, being usable, but we might have to really think structurally about what that means if we move towards data sovereignty.
Hi. I have a question that is kind of selfishly about my side job and not my Data Haven work, but I think that it's still relevant. I'll be honest. I am teaching data visualization to grad students at UMBC. And so we did talk some about literacy, about how to create charts and maps that people understand, and like a variety of audiences. And so some of that was accessibility, some of that was just like analyzing the reading level of the like title that you're putting on your chart, and designing different versions of things for different reading levels. ChatGPT was not very helpful with that, with like, can you revise this to a like 6th grade reading level? But I was just wondering, like, tips that you all have for people who are getting started creating. This is like, I guess maybe like a more like just like tangible sort of. But for just tips that you all have for people who are getting started creating those sorts of things, creating visualizations or putting together narratives, and also for those of us who are teaching people how to do that for the first time.
I want Sean to answer.
We have. Audience can answer. Where's Sean?
He said no. Sean's a great graphic designer, and working with him over the last 2 or 3 years, I've learned so much about data visualization. And I think we've worked too on making things more accessible from just like a physical standpoint, so colors and text, and making sure things are accessible from that perspective. But sometimes my data brain parses something very different from like a normal person's brain. And having to step back and think about what actually did that data point mean in terms of like the exact caveats that need to be represented. So I cannot put everything in a data visualization. I cannot put every asterisk of the data set that I want to. What is the most important thing? And being able to articulate that with words to somebody before we try to design it, and starting that process before I need the data visualization tomorrow. So having enough space for the team to look at it and be like, yeah, no. Like, we don't, like, this data doesn't reflect that or whatever, but it's an iterative process, and being okay with that, leaving enough time, but really just being able to actually know what the data meant and what the most important thing to communicate is. I think, yeah.
Building on that, I think like creating a place where it's okay to fail and not do it right. I think there's a lot of apprehension around like failing and doing data wrong, but having it be very low stakes so you can play around, and play has been something that's worked. In our data visualization workshop, we have people like create a data visualization, then we have them read the Do No Harm guide from Urban Institute, and then we have them redo their data visualization after they've read it.
So
I bring community members into my class, Camille, and have them do exactly that. Take a look at visualizations, create a safe space for folks to fail, and then give feedback. And for those of you who are in DC and met Miss Rita, Miss Hayden, and Miss Christina, Christina is the best one. She'll be like, I don't understand that at all. That doesn't make any sense to me. And it's the best way to see it. Bring members of the audience in to take a look in class or just in general. I know we can't all do this, but if you have the ability to create jobs in your organizations for folks to bring exactly that perspective, they've now been trained. We've now trained them on data visualizations, and now they're even better experts at seeing what does and does not work because they bring their lived and now their professional experience.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Francisca from Cleveland, thank you so much. It helps. It also provides like emotional support for us trying to, to learn how to connect with people who have a say in using data, creating data, and making good use of it. So we've been trying to look at the other side of things where data literacy for people coming into data science that feel, very energized to use data for good, and yet have been very disconnected from the community side of things. The data generating process in social context is embedded in biases and all this, and sometimes knowing like R to do great data visualizations can make one falsely feel empowered. Oh yeah, I can do this. And I know it's how do we, from a data science, data scientists, statisticians, economists, realize that it's more than that. It's learning where the assumptions that pair with the data to come to conclusions are where are we drawing those assumptions from? So while it's data literacy, we think of how do we connect with people in the community so that they feel empowered with data. I think it's the other side as well, right? That they might feel too empowered with techniques, but we know now as more and more algorithms are being used for decision making in child welfare, in homeless services decision making, healthcare. There's been big mistakes because people, use the wrong labels or labels that didn't represent the situations of highest need for people. So any comments on that side of the data literacy?
I'll just say I've focused a lot of my career on community data literacy and capacity, as I've mentioned, but at some point it seemed unethical to me to assume that all the capacity building needed to happen on the community side. It's really important to build the capacity of our institutions and researchers and research institutions to understand what it means to listen to community data needs and partner with them and allow them to partner equitably, which also means building their data literacy and capacity to equitably feel confident enough to share their opinions and drive, ultimately, hopefully, ideally, drive the research process. So I do get the opportunity to teach that to all of our public health students and through our summer institute. Ideally, in my summer institute on community-based participatory research methods, my intended audience are academics, and I get a lot of health department and healthcare delivery system folks. Ideally, I also have community members too, because they're the first ones to point out immediately that all of their assumptions are wrong. And it's better to come from them than to come from me. But I think that, for those of us who sit in places where we could build the capacity of our colleagues and of the systems or our bosses or whatever it is, I think that is a really important piece of this.
Sounds like we need a discussion group for all of you who teach this too. Yeah.
I have a question on format. So in Atlanta, we've done a lot of webinars the last couple of years. We do workshops when we're asked to, and they all go pretty well. We do evaluations at the end, and they're good. But I think more people aren't coming as much for the content as much as to share their ideas and get feedback because they don't have anyone else to talk to in their organization. And so we started doing this thing that we call Data Breakfast Club. It's had an average of about 60 people showing up, which is we don't have any money for that many donuts, but that's gone really well, and we have like this feeling that maybe community building as a way of doing capacity building is effective. But I'm also wondering, what other formats have y'all tried, or has anyone tried that isn't just a training or a workshop? Because it feels like the people who show up to those are already in. Like, how do you lure people into data literacy, or like how do you set up a trap?
Maybe at the public library.
What was that? Were you talking to me? Maybe, yeah. That's what I thought you
Maybe.
were pointing to someone.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, we've held data day with the library, which was all for like accidentally showing up and learning about data, or different tabling events, or it usually ends up in a workshop or a training format. But I do think like the casual, low stakes way is very how you reach more people. I like your breakfast club. I love all breakfast clubs.
Yeah,
so.
we stole the idea and did a data breakfast, and it turned out really good, but it was a different group then shows up to the data trainings for us. Most of our data trainings generally get spun up because somebody comes to us, asks us about a specific question, I show them a tool, and they're like, wait, what, can you come show us this thing? Like, so everybody can learn about it. But although we don't have anything, the data breakfast was great though, so thanks.
We've been trying office hours as more informal, like drop-in. I might have even gotten that from NNIP. But I'm a proponent of getting to folks when they're required to evaluate something is a great time. They're captive audiences. They have to do this to help, like, hand-hold through the process of building their capacity for that evaluation will bring incredible capacity and infrastructure to their organizations if they and you are intentional about it. So I'm a big proponent of the captive audience. It's a great place to build capacity.
Input from the audience.
I was just going to throw in one thing that they're not still going here, but Sean and I think we may have met there. But Allied Media put together what they call data discotheques. Mm-hmm. And so quarterly, we were in different parts of the city, all different people set up. It's really just, hey, we'll walk you through a tool, we'll walk you through whatever's there, we'll help you with like a city website. But it was a chance for just people to get together in a space they were comfortable in and take something away from it. And it really built a really good data community in one way from all of the participants, but also had a lot of community building to it. And it was really low stakes and a lot of fun.
So Erica asked me for host prerogative. We were forgetting somebody way in the back. So if it could be prompt, who was I think it was Lily? Lily, sorry. I have to give her a t-shirt. Just one last quick so we can do the table talks.
Hi, I'm Lily from Boston. I feel like one of the main ways our organization has to build data literacy is through our written products and our web-based data portal. And I was curious, and that I feel like the option is through kind of tooltips and kind of 1 sentence to 4 sentence explanations of our data visuals. And I was curious if and how you've been kind of incorporating kind of these little snippets of data literacy into kind of products like that.
I think, we do include a lot of context with what we share, and we have blogs, and we've been told we have to do week notes, but it hasn't happened yet. But I think for us, the convening part is really important. So we have a saying of content without convening is dead content. So we always try to have it be more the in-person piece of it. But it is there, but it's less, I think, purposefully data literacy tagged. But I don't know if I said that right, but yeah.
Most of our tools we have many iterations on like how we've done workshops and tutorials and stuff. Incorporating like the Esri story maps has been really helpful because you can scroll through and like put those pop-ups and show people like where to click and how they could potentially interact with and what comes next. And so building that out as a tutorial, it's more interactive than just like a PDF document that they have to like look at. But we have one of those we can send out, especially after a workshop, like, hey, you learned a bunch of stuff. I threw a lot at you in the last hour and a half. Here's like the top tips and tricks for that platform. And then I've done some like video tutorials of how I need to access this data point. Like, how do I click through the website to actually get to what I'm looking for? Because the problem with having lots of data in a website is that sometimes it's hard for somebody to just like intuitively get there. So being able to like send a video that like helps them walk through the steps of getting to the right zip code or the right data point, that's been helpful too.
And I probably sound like a broken record, but we do all that documentation. We do call-out boxes in our data briefs where we'll define things like an indicator or social determinants of health. We also will point out what data is missing, because I think the community thinks that all data is collected, and part of their literacy and capacity building is understanding what data would be most useful to them that isn't collected. But we have community members vet all of that. So they, let us know what needs to be defined. They, demo all of our data dashboards and briefs, and oftentimes are co-authoring our briefs as well. So that perspective is really critical.
But we had a little exercise and chance to talk at the table, so I'll switch to that.
So I said we were going back to participation. So on your table, you have worksheets. And those worksheets, there's a series of questions on those worksheets. They are also up on the slide behind me. So what we want you all to do is to take a few minutes independently and just jot down some of your thoughts as they relate to those questions. And after, I would say, about 5 or so minutes, open up the conversation to the table and just kind of have a discussion amongst yourself. We don't have time to report out on this, but we hope that these both documents and conversations are a productive way to kind of share how your organizations are working through this topic. So go.